recording just after Boris Johnson has made his speech outside Downing Street, suggesting that he will be leaving. So the question today is, who could replace him? Jason, thanks for taking the time to join us out of a very busy time trying to put the next magazine together. What did you make of the speech when you watched it?
You know, I've been watching Westminster for a long time, and I don't think I've ever seen anything like this. I mean, truly remarkable. What did I think of the speech? I thought there were elements of typical Johnson there. The boosterism, referring back to his big mandate he won the party won in the 2019 general election, you know, the support for Ukraine, references to levelling up and the vaccine rollout. But I agree with you, it was a slightly chippy speech. Sadness, suppressed anger, I think. There was no sense of contrition or humility. And also there was no sense that there was any fixed time for his departure. So I think in many ways his premiership has been absolutely disastrous, and in many ways inevitable too, that it should have ended in this way. But it's still an absolutely epic collapse, I think, from the position he found himself in December 2019.
Well, Freddie, you've just come over from actually outside Downing Street. What was the atmosphere like? What did you make of it all?
I thought it was a complete farce, really. We were there in the press pen. They set out speakers so we could try and hear the speech, but the speakers didn't work. 2 minutes before...
A metaphor if ever there was.
Exactly. 2 minutes before he began speaking, Steve Bray turned up. Steve Bray's the infamous protester who comes to Parliament Square with his speaker protesting Brexit, but also Boris Johnson. So his speaker was blaring throughout. And then on top of that, we had booing, cheers, competing as there was a huge crowd at the bottom of Downing Street. So it wasn't exactly the serious, reflective speech that you might have hoped. But I also think that was reflected in Johnson's speech. There was, I thought, a bitterness to his speech, a snide feeling that I don't think will go down well at all with the Conservative Parliamentary Party. He's drawn the battle lines for the conflict between him and his MPs that is going to play out over the next few days. So I thought it was an interesting tactic to take, and I thought it spoke to the fact that he sees his premiership at least going on for 3 months or so. He is here to fight. As Jason said earlier, he did not resign. He remains party leader. He remains prime minister. We're hoping that the leadership election will happen now and a new leader will come to the fore. But there's a lot of time for Johnson to try and play the game, for try and go to Ukraine again. And there's lots of things that he can do to try and bring back some of the support they had among MPs. Yeah, so he is trying to find a route out. He's trying to find a new source of legitimacy, which I don't think will go down well with the Tory party, and I don't think is compatible with our constitution.
Well, Rachel, what's going on now? Because there are new appointments to the cabinet already, aren't there? I mean, does that suggest that there will be a sort of period of this caretaker stability that some MPs have been calling for?
It's utterly mind-blowing, isn't it? I was on Politics Live earlier today, and while we were on the programme, we kept being interrupted to say, oh, and so is Education Secretary now, James Cleverly, and Greg Clark is Secretary of State for Levelling Up, and Kit Malthouse is, oh God, what is Kit? Duchy of Lancaster, there we go. And you're like, these are all people either who Boris Johnson sacked, but more importantly, why are you taking these jobs in a government that is by definition a caretaker government? I think there was a sort of sense last night that if he resigned, the sensible thing to do would just be to reappoint everyone who resigned in protest and have that sense of continuity. But no, he's gone for fresh faces there. And that combined with various other things, like the fact that he adamantly refused to resign all of yesterday when you were getting resignations at a rate of sort of every couple of minutes, or 5 ministers resigning on one letter, which was particularly amusing. And the speech, as has been discussed, that had no contrition, no regrets, no admission of fault, and set himself up against the sort of herd mentality of Westminster and referred to the Conservatives' eccentric decision to get rid of him. All of that suggests to me that he doesn't really, deep down, still think that he's going. And he didn't actually say that he was going. He said that, there would be a process for a new leader. That's not quite the same thing as actually stepping down. And I think, Freddie's right. 6 weeks, 8 weeks is a really long time in politics. Look at what happened with the Partygate scandal that looked like it was just about to tip over and oust him, and then suddenly Russia invades Ukraine. And I really think he is counting on something turning up that will enable him to stay in power. I don't think he's got it yet. I think he thinks he's under fire and he still has to fight. And the idea that, no, actually, this is the end, we might all think that. I don't think he thinks that.
Right. Jason, what do you think of this idea of him staying on? I mean, a lot of Conservative MPs are extremely concerned about this.
He obviously will go as Prime Minister. He won't be Prime Minister come the autumn, but he will try and stay on for as long as he possibly can, I think. And I think that's probably going to be another battleground. A lot of Conservative MPs are very unhappy about an open-ended continuation to his premiership. The wait for a new Conservative leader to be elected. And there may even be pushes for a kind of caretaker Prime Minister.
So who do you think could potentially replace him, Jason? I mean, we know that these rival leadership campaigns are already up and running. The latest briefing, I think, has been Jake Berry could potentially be a contender, head of the Northern Research Group. Of course, the Red Wall Conservative MPs are looking for a sort of new lodestar. What do you think, Jason?
I think Sunak and Javid are well placed, having moved very quickly this week. The first to jump ship, as it were. And also they've got a very coherent view of what they want conservatism to be. And, here is a desire, I think, to move the Conservative back to the free market, right, low taxes, limited government, smaller state. And I think if Javid and Sunak do some kind of deal and run on the same ticket, they could be formidable and very hard to beat, I think. Despite the problems that Sunak has had in recent times when he was Chancellor. Other contenders is Ben Wallace, or will he be too damaged by staying in the ship for too long? Liz Truss is obviously positioning herself popular among the grassroots, but I think an unconvincing candidate. I think it's going to be very hard for Jeremy Hunt and Tugendhat, sort of moderate centrists. Hunt, in many ways, is still seen as a Cameroon. And I think Brexit still runs through the Conservative Party in the way that appeasement ran through the Conservative Party after the Second World War and ultimately prevented someone like Rab Butler ever becoming Prime Minister because of the side of the argument he was on over appeasement before the Second World War. And I think Brexit similarly will play a big part in the leadership contest. In other words, I think a Brexiteer will ultimately emerge as the next Prime Minister. I don't think the party will return to a liberal Remainer such as Jeremy Hunt, even though Hunt has positioned himself differently now and has accepted the inevitability of Brexit and all that comes with it.
Freddie, what are you hearing from the MPs that you're speaking to?
Yeah, I think Jason's right in that Tugendhat and Hunt will seek to try and win support among the more liberal aspects of the party. You'll see the One Nation caucus, for instance, basically run a primary to see who their main candidate should be. Sajib, I would say on that, he's seen as not very charismatic at all, and people are concerned that he doesn't have the communication skills to maintain Johnson's coalition from 2019, because that's in the back of lots of Tories' minds at the moment. How do we maintain this coalition, a lot of which was forged because of Brexit? So they need a leader who's able to do that. I think there's the same criticism can be applied to Sunak. If Sunak wants this sort of low tax, debt management, fiscal policy, then you're struggling to attract some of those northern voters who might have been won over by levelling up, for instance. So there are pitfalls in many of the. I mean, Liz Truss, she voted for Remain, even though she's done she's really tried to.
The metamorphosis of Liz Truss from Remainer to,
hardcore
Brexiteer.
Yeah.
Let's blow up our international treaties. It's quite miraculous.
It has, yeah. It has been something to witness.
But she will be seen as coming from the libertarian right, won't she, Liz Truss? So in that sense, I think Freddie makes a good point about holding Johnson's 2019 coalition together. I think it'd be extremely difficult for them to do so. The thing about Johnson, the reason why he was such a dangerous opponent for the left was that he didn't ultimately believe in anything. He wasn't really a small state, low tax, free market ideologue. He was pragmatic. He didn't mind spending money, didn't mind putting up taxes. He didn't mind having a big interventionist state. So in that sense, he was unpredictable, and he changed his mind. He was flexible and he was pragmatic. And that made him, I think, particularly dangerous.
And of course, it's a big question as well for the Labour Party, isn't it? Who they would most like to go up against and who they would least like to go up against. And they do insist, insiders in Keir Starmer's office insist that Rishi Sunak sort of would be an easy opponent. But they have always said, the best case scenario, not for the country, but for the Labour Party's prospects is Boris Johnson staggering on. So if he doesn't, there is an open question there of who would be the most dangerous potential contender against Keir Starmer, although we haven't heard from the Durham police yet. Rachel, what do you think? Who would be Labour's sort of best and worst case scenario?
They'll probably have a lot of fun if it's Rishi Sunak, partly with his background, although we had a feature a couple of weeks ago on how Rishi Sunak's background and that of his wife actually play well with Britain's Hindu-Indian community, which Labour have found very difficult to reach and don't quite understand why. But putting that aside, having a sort of billionaire wife whose tax status is a bit dodgy, while saying that there's no money left to do anything about the cost of living crisis, I think is helpful to Labour. We haven't mentioned Zahawi here, who clearly definitely thinks of himself as a contender. When the history books write about this period of history, the fact that Johnson lost a chancellor, appointed a new one, and then the next day that chancellor is calling for him to go. I mean, absolutely mind-boggling. And that seems to have been a strategy on Zahawi's part. We were hearing reports today that actually he's been meeting with consultants and thinking about a leadership bid for some time. So clearly he thinks that this is the way to it, to kind of build on his success as vaccine minister, become chancellor, become a household name, and then rise to be leader that way. There's also, of course, Penny Mordaunt, who clearly thinks that she has a shot. Nobody is trying to make Penny Mordaunt happen more than Penny Mordaunt. She's obviously a Brexiteer. She was quite well respected in the Defence Department, and even though she has been a minister in Johnson's government, she's been quite distant and often critical of him, so perhaps isn't as tarnished as some of the other people involved, although I often hear that she believes in herself perhaps more than anyone else believes in her. So while I think it's true that the Conservatives do not want a Jeremy Hunt character in charge, there aren't that many Brexit options that are kind of clean, as it were, which is a challenge for them. And let's not forget, if there were a clear and obvious frontrunner, we wouldn't be in this situation now, because the vote of no confidence a few weeks ago would have been much better organised and directed and would have succeeded.